welcome to another episode of Entrepreneur Mind Speak. I'm Lauren with Creme de Mint, a branding and packaging design agency, and I'm here with my co-host Natalie.
Hi, I'm Natalie from Cloud Create Web Development based in Tampa, Florida.
And today we have Jessie Schwartz on the podcast. Welcome, Jessie.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
Hi, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. My name is Jessie Schwartz. I run Strategic Packaging Partners, and we're a cross-functional technical team that helps people bring products to life by manufacturing them efficiently and solving problems in that process. So
Awesome. And so tell us a little bit how you got started. Like what prompted you to start your own business?
that's a great question. I was at a point where I was working part-time for General Mills and decided to embark on a new adventure and left General Mills. And shortly after that, I started this company, just seeing a real gap in technical service providers who could kind of jump in for different companies when they needed it, and then kind of let them take the reins after the problem was solved. So I started in 2019. And so we've kind of grown to not just a packaging organization that helps like as packaging engineers and technical problem solvers, but we've kind of expanded to include, okay, how does packaging interact with operations, procurement, quality, logistics, right? Because it touches every area of the business. So it's a really important topic, and I'm glad we're talking about it today.
Yay.
Absolutely.
As a packaging designer, this is like huge. We will design packaging, but having a packaging engineer to make sure everything runs well and takes a look at everything, I mean, it's huge. That's important.
Yeah, and it gets tricky really quickly.
Absolutely. I can't wait to hear more. So just to kind of start out, because of course a lot of our clients and a lot of people listening are food and beverage entrepreneurs, and they might struggle with things like costs. What would you say are the biggest cost saving on opportunities?
Well, I think it's finding the right partner in the beginning. So if you're a startup and you have, you're not really sure about your volumes and you don't want really high MOQs, it's finding the right packaging supplier to help you initially, and then understanding that supplier, as you grow, you might need to change suppliers just based on where the market that they serve the best. And it's really depends on what type of packaging structure you're using. So for example, if you're in film and paperboard and corrugated, there's a lot of suppliers US based, but it does get a little trickier if you're in a glass package, for example, because most glass is imported. So it's about finding, like, your print partner might have connections with suppliers, finding companies like mine who have a lot of connections with different suppliers at different stages, because there's definitely a need and a growing need for lower MOQs, digital printed stuff. Really finding a supplier that serves your niche is important, and they do exist. So you have to, when you thought about like who you wanted to represent your brand and your design, and you really thought about it and you had a lot of questions, that level of discernment should also take place for who your supplier is, and just not like Alibaba it, right? Because that can be a problem for lead times, for quality, a lot of different things. So
So obviously, like, and I also am not in the packaging industry. We built the websites, right, for the customers that then use packaging. But not being in that industry, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners might not even be as versed in it as you guys are. Can you explain a little bit more of like, or maybe give an example of where you could fit in, or like what would be a great example, since you're obviously not just your average, packaging supplier.
Yeah.
Could you give a little bit more of an example of exactly like what would be a great example of an area where you would help?
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't sell anything. So we don't sell any packaging. We are service providers that help ensure success for the choices that you've made with who you want to work with, and we can help make connections too. So we worked with a startup who needed a lot of different things from a technical standpoint. So the first thing we did was a site assessment, because they hadn't purchased any packaging equipment yet. So they were like, okay, we haven't purchased anything. Come take a look at our site, make sure that help us avoid mistakes in how we lay this thing out, right? So we went in as a cross-functional team. We did that work. We helped them understand, like, actually you have to, from a food safety standpoint, you have to separate your processing room from your finished goods room, things like that. So we helped in that space. We also helped them find a packaging supplier that could fit sort of their lower MOQ initial orders. And this particular supplier was close to their production location, and they also had a separate business for larger volume. So it was kind of a partner they could grow with. They also needed help with food safety plan, so a HACCP plan. So we have an expert that does HACCP plans. We brought them in. Then they needed some help with labeling, right? So like design agencies don't always have like regulatory and labeling on staff. That's really super common, but then that also needs to be addressed. So we're able to come in and take a look at all the claims and all the layouts and the font sizes to make sure that the label meets regulatory requirements. And then we were able to just give general advice as they go along with technical issues, because a lot of times, like, you're really in the weeds with what you're creating. You're seeing these problems, and it just gets really frustrating because you can't really access that creative problem solving part of your brain because you're like so in the weeds in what you're doing, that having a team or having a contact that you can kind of have fractional kind of on your staff to help at those times is really super powerful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That really gave a great overview.
So one of the other things, like when you were speaking, I was thinking about entrepreneurs when they're looking for suppliers. You mentioned them not looking on Alibaba. Are there places that you recommend people look for suppliers?
Well, Laura, maybe this is a question for you too. Like, are you guys connected to suppliers? Because you guys are sending print. Do you send final print directly to suppliers? Are you like forming connections and
Yeah,
network?
we have a supplier list that we have a supplier list that is for secondary packaging, for like print packaging. And then we also have a supplier list for primary packaging, looking for suppliers that have low MLQs that we can send to our clients,
Yes.
ones that we've either worked with or that we've come across throughout our process. What is it like for you?
It's a loosely connected network, I'd say.
Mhm.
And with that being said, it's important to ask your partners, okay, what connections do you have with suppliers? And then for you all, if you run into a situation where you have like a complex paperboard insert and you're like, I don't know, because you can't, one thing to do something in CAD and it's, or into design, and then it's another thing to create like a die to cut it out, right? And
Right.
so it kind of depends on what you need and who you're leveraging, right? So if you have something complicated, you call me, then we have CAD people and we have design folks and we know suppliers that can kind of step in too. And it's really good to be scrappy, right? So like, let's say you call me, let's go with this like insert. You're like, hey, we have this complicated insert that we want it all to fold together and we want it to be one piece. Okay, so then I have some partners that do complicated paperboard projects, and I might even just refer you to them because they do some design on their own, and then they of course know how to build dies. And so that would be just like a great way for you to just skip over anything that we provide and just start working with them. So I think as an entrepreneur, being able to ask like really good questions around partners and your needs, and then if you have like an inkling that maybe there's something else out there, having the ability to kind of investigate that. You can do some Googling, but I found it's higher impact to leverage relationships versus the Google machine when it comes to finding suppliers, because there's so many different options out there. And kind of going back to what I said earlier, if you're partnering with a supplier that does digital printing, for example, that's pretty low initial cost because you're not paying for print plates. Just understand that, like, don't feel super stressed out, like if something doesn't end up working out or you have to change suppliers because now your production location changed. I mean, those types of things happen and you can manage through them. So that's,
Yeah, I think it's important to share that because I think sometimes people think they're locked in to a supplier and they're thinking, "Oh, I need to keep this supplier the whole time." And maybe that's not the case because, like, as you said, if they grow, that supplier may not be the right option for them anymore. And so
yeah.
I think keeping that flexible mindset, I think, is really important and continue
Well,
to vet partners as well.
yes, I agree. And it's really important to understand the technical aspects of your packaging. I think so much energy goes into the design and the shelf appeal and all these things that sometimes it's like, okay, I just need film to put this artwork on and we'll be good. But that's not true. That's not true. Do some extra work. What is the extra work? Order samples, figure out like if the zipper is really working or not, do shelf life testing. And we have partners that do shelf life testing, like do something. You have to make sure that you're getting the right barrier, that your product is staying fresh through shelf life, and that the function of the package is actually serving you. When you work with a supplier that's doing your corrugated cases, ask them for a cube specification. Make sure that you're maximizing. You have to ship that pallet, the whole column of air be above the pallet. So it may as well have your product on it. So make sure that you don't have, 6 inches all the way around the pallet that doesn't have anything on it. So ask for the cube specification, and there's data on there, like what's the efficiency of the cube? Like it should be somewhere around 90%. Um, and being able to leverage the packaging information. And also, like you said earlier, like taking that, if you have to move your business for some reason or add another supplier, then if you've asked your suppliers for their specifications, like what is the oxygen transmission rate, the water transmission rate, the makeup of the film, like what is each layer made of, you get to request that from your supplier. They should be able to provide that to you. And in that way too, like in the future, let's say you have a quality concern. Okay, well, that could be 1,000 different things. It's not fresh. Okay, so if you have a crunchy product and you're getting a complaint that it's not fresh, okay, is it a consumer perception thing? Like they just don't get it. Like we're doing granola and it's supposed to be a little softer or it has a little different texture, right? So like, is it the consumer perception? Is it a packaging problem? So is it a barrier problem? So maybe you don't have a high enough moisture barrier in your film. Or was there a defect in the packaging, right? So like it didn't seal. There was a bunch of folds in the film and there was a hole in it or whatever. There's a lot of different reasons technically the film could fail. So if you know your packaging specs and you know how it's supposed to function, you can kind of navigate the decision tree or the why on what exactly happened, because most people just let their packaging specs live at their supplier. That's what most people do. And then like we had a client once that had 12 different carton sizes. They had kind of acquired new products and designed kind of for that product, and they had proliferated their carton sizes. Well, during a changeover, you're running different flavors. You got to change all the guardrails. You got to change everything because it's a different size box. Well, if you know your packaging specifications and you know what you're ordering and you understand why, and you're looking for places to be more efficient, 12 carton sizes might not be the right number. Maybe it's 5. And then you just change the cartons on the cartoner. Film stays the same. The corrugated box is the same size. Maybe it has something different printed on it, but everything becomes more efficient without making all those adjustments during changeovers. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for that very thorough explanation. Like, as I said, I'm not in the packaging industry directly, so it's very interesting to hear. Like, of course, these problems could cost hundreds of thousands over time. Having these inefficiencies, are there any other inefficiencies that are common that you see happening often?
Not sure about like other like that. That's a good summary. I think leveraging your contract manufacturer to provide some ideas for you is a good idea. Asking, once you get the product off the ground and you kind of have an established schedule and established production quantity, you can start asking questions about how to be more efficient. There's a host of inefficiencies on the manufacturing side that a brand owner wouldn't control in terms of, scheduling is really tricky. If you can minimize the number of scheduling changes you ask for, like that's a huge inefficiency in manufacturing, where it's like emergency order. And when you do emergency orders, there's a risk the packaging won't be there. There's a risk the ingredients won't be there. So understanding kind of the needs, and honestly, like brand owners don't always control that either, right? It's like coming from their customers. And so there's just there is a lot of inefficiencies in there, but working with a partner that schedule locks. So like if you have a contract manufacturer, it's really important to lock a schedule, and you can't always do everything for everyone. And so asking some questions up front about how the contract manufacturer organizes their orders, for example, that would be important, because that can affect your production if they're kind of all over the place, and not able to deliver. Like what's their service rate, right? Like what's their ability to maintain a schedule and deliver when they're supposed to, would be a good question to ask. That's like a whole other topic. It's a little adjacent to my expertise in terms of how do you find a good contract manufacturer and what do you ask? What questions do you ask? But that can be a big area for inefficiencies too. But other than what we've talked about now for packaging, I think it's pretty good. So
Yeah, very thorough. Thank you.
And so let's talk a little bit about sustainability. Like that is a major concern for so many brands right now. And what are
yeah,
some budget-friendly ways that businesses can make their packaging more sustainable? And are there any upcoming trends in sustainability packaging that entrepreneurs should keep an eye on?
sure. So sustainability is super tricky, because what does it mean? So does it mean their packaging could sometime at some point be recycled? Does it mean your packaging is optimized to reduce food waste? Does it mean your pallets maximized to reduce logistics and emissions from shipping? No, there can be so many different ways to approach it. I think what people think of is the packaging structure. Can I compost it? Can I recycle it? And the data around recycling and sustainability, like the data around, if my intention is for my package to be recyclable, is it getting recycled? The data says no. The data says somewhere between 7 and 9% of recyclable films ever in recyclable plastics ever get recycled. So I think it's important to kind of just add a sense of realistic what's going on in the world, in the US today. Does that mean that you shouldn't have a recyclable package? No. But if you look at like, let's talk about coffee, for example. So you have a steel container, right? Recyclable steel. You have a recyclable plastic container, or you have a multi-layer non-recyclable, like that film bag that sits on the shelf that you see everywhere, right? If you look at the energy inputs to create and recycle those different structures, that multi-layer non-recyclable film structure by far uses the least amount of energy to make, takes up the least amount of space in a landfill that ends up there, can be incinerated for energy extraction. So that's why it's so confusing, right? Because you're like, okay, but like my consumer, they want to recycle this. They want to know that they can, that it'll be reused again. And you're like, I know, it's so great. It's so great if that would be the case. And I think you see this revolution / evolution of how we are claiming responsibility for packaging as manufacturers and brand owners. And the issue is we don't have a uniform processing infrastructure in the US, right? So like we just don't have enough high tech, and it's not always easy either. I mean, you go to some of these MRFs, these processing facilities, there's people on the line pulling stuff off, like people on lines where garbage is dumped, and there's other lines that are all like photo eye separated. There's other lines that you can actually like print a 2D barcode in the back of a label, and it will like identify what packaging it is, and it'll be sorted by a photo eye. You're just like, holy cow, there's so many different levels of sophistication. So that's one problem. The other problem is just consumers. You're literally depending on the consumer. They don't care like the brand owner cares. They don't care like legislatures care. They don't. Like, you, how do you influence the consumer to make a decision, right? Like, because and it's confusing. It's confusing for the consumer. Like, what do I do with this? Check locally. What does that even mean?
Right. It is really confusing. And not only that, but there's like plenty of places that don't have recycling facilities,
Yes.
like apartment complexes, they just don't have them. And so
Yes.
that means the consumer is expected to go find a place that does the recycling, and it's not.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so let's just, you have to be realistic too, like in your size, right? So like if you're a smaller startup, you don't have to report to a pro. You don't have to start paying fees for EPR. Like, that is not in your wheelhouse. So what you're concerned about is, does my product, am I doing something reasonable? So we had somebody who they made cookies, and they were really excited about having a recyclable film. Great, but the cookies were flavorless and crunchy when they were supposed to be soft and chewy, because the recyclable film didn't have the right barrier. So then you have to say, okay, as part of our sustainability plan, we're going to say we're not going to do recyclable because we need more shelf life. We don't want our product to get thrown away. So that's the sustainable decision we're making by not having recyclable film. And that can be a thing. So it's holistically approaching, like, how do I cut out the waste? Is it the waste at the end, what the consumer does with the packaging? Is it a waste in food waste? Or is it a waste in transportation? Is there anything I can do in there? So most consumers, they only see the package on the shelf, but there's so much more to a sustainability story than just like the end packaging that the consumers use. Does that make sense?
I love that explanation. That's like a really holistic explanation that we've talked to quite a few, sustainable packaging producers, which is amazing. Like, I think every innovation in this area is awesome, but it really is important to look at that whole story. True food waste. If the packaging is not protecting the food and it's all going to end up in a landfill, that's not very sustainable either. Or if it's leaving huge gaps in the pallets, and so this huge truck or boats, even worse, are transporting air, which I think a lot of people know how awful the emissions are on those massive boats. Like, that's one of the worst polluters there is. So like having a lot of space there, is also horrible. So thank you so much. That's very interesting.
So jumping into another direction, what role does packaging play in a brand's supply chain, and how can businesses optimize it to avoid waste and inefficiencies?
There is a lot of things that you can do to help reduce toll, reduce cost. And sometimes you can make those plays in the initial engagement with a contract manufacturer. Sometimes you have to wait a little while. And so efficiencies are something you can gain all the time, right? So like at General Mills, like every year we'd go out and find tens of millions of dollars in savings. And we had the same plants, and we had this, similar products and whatever. So like, it's an evergreen thing. Efficiencies will always appear because manufacturing is a very dynamic environment. So I think that's sometimes what trips people up a little bit, that it's it can evolve, right? Efficiencies always are popping up and it's evolving. It's something you should be asking about like all the time. It's not like one and done thing. But Contract manufacturers, sometimes they have supplier agreements where they will order the packaging for you and leverage the scale that they're gaining from, you know, making tons of different products for different companies. Sometimes you want to ask them like, okay, I have a bag in a box, or I have a zipper pouch. Like what parameters should I stay in? If I want to optimize like changeovers on your end, like what can I do? We talked about pallet patterns, but so like being efficient about how your product is stacking on a pallet, keeping an open dialogue. So like, if you have a contract manufacturer, like how often are you talking to them? What kind of data are they giving you about quality? What kind of data are they giving you about throughput? And asking those questions so you can be a partner to them too, but then also understand like, okay, these guys, their OEE is, you know, 50%, right? Like some of those metrics of manufacturing are really low, whereas somebody, a world-class OEE is like 80%, 85%. So 85% of the time you're up, you're running, you're creating product. So honestly, it's getting the right technical resources and partners, because you can't do, as a brand owner, you can't do everything yourself. And I think manufacturing turns kind of into this black box of like, okay, I have a product that I like, that I want to bring to the market. I have the branding right. And so I'm just gonna like put in this black box that's gonna pop out like ready to ship to Target, right? So finding partners, like don't feel like you need to know all of this stuff. Find people to help you understand, like us.
And I think that's one of the hardest things for a lot of entrepreneurs is to be like, okay, like I can't do it all myself, because a lot of times people think like, oh, I can do this myself, I'll save money, but in the long run they don't, because they're not experts in everything.
Yeah. And cash. Cash is a problem. So like, how do you leverage the money that you have to get the highest impact, right? And like, what coaches are you using, or what biz dev people have you brought into the fold to help you make these like decisions? So
Yeah, absolutely.
And on the other side of the spectrum, of course, we have the consumer perception of the packaging itself. So could you tell us a little bit more about that? About like, obviously, you have various different kinds of packaging, and a huge purpose of that packaging, especially in stores, is to get the product sold. So what do brands need to consider from your perspective? Of course, the aesthetics and regulations, you have those things. But what are some other details that you're making sure that brands are looking at?
yeah, so make sure you're asking questions like, how big should the peg hole be? So know where your product will be on the shelf. What are, like, if you are a pouched product, or you're going to be on the shelf and pegged, make sure that the peg hole is large enough. Make sure that you should be ordering. Okay, so you should be ordering product from your contract manufacturer. They should send you some kind of samples. And you should be looking at your product in the market. You should be like staying on top of like what your expectations are and what you're getting. Because for example, we had one company send a bunch of product in that the peg hole was too small. So then it ended up like, what do you do with it? Then it ended up on the ground, like that bottom shelf, just kind of stacked there weird. So that's bad. And that's just a setting on the seal jaws, or that's the setting on the sealer. It punches a hole at the same time to seal it shut. And shelf height. So understanding, okay, what are the shelf height requirements where my product will be? And then I'll think about, like, for example, at Target has all the pushers for products in the shelf, and even in dairy case, I mean, they're everywhere. So if you're going to put a bunch of information down low, like, will the consumer see it? Will it be covered by a pusher or some other like edging on a shelf? Go to the store and just look at different chains, see how they have their shelves set up so that you can be strategic with like where you put graphics and how you're communicating to the consumer. Um, and then the retailer will have a lot of requirements for you to look at to make sure to help you be successful, right? And be fit on their shelf and look good. And how many, because some retailers want like a case and a half to fit on the shelf. And so like, can you stack product on top? I mean, there's there's a lot to think about, but then there's also guidelines to follow to help you be successful. So yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to hear. And as an expert in packaging engineering, what is one piece of advice you'd give entrepreneurs who want to create packaging that stands out but still remains functional and cost effective?
There's a lot of innovation in printing, I would say. There's a lot of different textures you can get from different inks. Um, it's amazing. It's so fun. And that also adds cost, right? So um, understanding how much you want to spend on the different effects and asking the question around like, okay, if you've got a couple different suppliers, they can send you different examples of what they've done in the past, and you can add a lot of cool things to your packaging. And I'd say overall, and you can speak to this trend too, it seems like the pendulum swings between like a lot of content on a package to like being super simple. I don't know, there's trends because people spend an average of like 2 to 3 seconds looking for the thing they want on the shelf. They're scanning all the time, right? So it's like, how do you stand out? Well, that looks different all the time. So if you have a really busy shelf, like I could go back to coffee. Like for a while, there's a lot of beautiful printed bags and there's a lot of stuff happening on the labels. And then you'll have another brand that's like coffee, dark roast, whole bean, and it's a plain bag, right? And so how do you play the dynamic shelf? Like it's like a SWOT analysis, right? And understanding where some of that should play, how you should play. Um, does that help, or do you want to ask it differently?
No, I think that is really helpful. And I think it's important to notice what is changing on the shelf. How is it changing? Because that might determine how you're going to stand out. Yeah.
Yeah.
And brands are changing all the time, like existing brands. They're going from, like, I have a brand right now that's doing exactly what you're talking about. They were very simple, and now we're getting more busy, like they're adding
Mhm.
more. And it's a little tricky because you want to make sure that the consumer is going to know immediately what it is, but by making it a little bit busier, they may be grabbing their attention also because
Mhm.
it's showing different aspects. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And with AI and with 2D barcodes, and the wine company, not is it Nine Hands? I think that's right. Nine Crimes. Nine Crimes.
Yes.
They have interactive labels, for example, and you can even Google search interactive packaging. Some companies are starting to do like recipes where you can scan and watch a recipe. I don't think that that's getting a bunch of traction. You don't see that trend a lot, but there are ways to be creative, um, and try to draw the consumers into the experience of the product. And it's tough to be disruptive. Liquid death is like one in a million, right? And that it's hard. But I see a lot of people also moving to like subscription services. So if you can get people to love your brand and get onto a subscription service, e-commerce, it's like a whole nother conversation about how do you manage your own e-commerce orders, things like that. And like, is Amazon really the best partner? But there's different ways to create excitement. Like when your product shows up, you can add some flair if you're going right to the consumer. You can create some more predictable ordering, right? If you have the direct to consumer, you get potentially the benefit of delivering a product with more shelf life because you have a shorter supply chain, things like that. So there's a lot of different ways to approach things. Yeah.
I love it. Like, I really feel like I really enjoyed our conversation and our interview slash conversation because I feel like you've covered a lot of ground from a lot of different angles that we haven't really addressed on the podcast. So I really appreciate that. Natalie, do you have any other thoughts or questions before we wrap up?
I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, you covered so much. I guess the one little tidbit I thought of when you mentioned the interactive packaging, since we work with a lot of e-commerce brands, I have seen that where, they'll send the customer will purchase the one-time product and then they can scan it in order to subscribe. So I've definitely
Mhm.
seen this, but yeah, there's a lot of creativity that can be done for sure. Both for in-store and e-commerce. It's all about thinking outside the box. And I really loved how you went over that.
And I forgot to mention something, so I'm going to mention that. Um, in terms of sustainability and innovation, there is going to be a lot more coming out in terms of film and backyard compostable structures. So if you think about the compostable structures now, they're all industrial compostable, meaning it has to break down to a certain size after a certain amount of time. You have to have heat, you have to turn a pile, you have to have big equipment. And that isn't practical for most communities. And there is a shift towards, okay, what does backyard compostable mean? Because it opens up the window of time that a structure can decompose. It doesn't have to be 6 weeks down to 3 millimeters or whatever it is. So that would be a trend to keep an eye on, because that area right now is very much an entrepreneur itself, compostable films. And right now it's like each layer of a compostable structure is made by a different company, then they're sent to one place and they're laminated together, and it's kind of bananas. But that's a space where there's going to be new and innovative structures coming out that you could potentially get a barrier film that is compostable. I wouldn't say it's commercial yet though, but you could keep an eye on it.
Yeah, no, that's really great. I love hearing about new trends and maybe we can talk a little bit more about that offline. Love to
Yeah,
hear some of your favorites that you're
for
seeing.
sure.
Maybe we can get them on the podcast to interview them. That wraps up another episode of Entrepreneur Mind Speak. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you on our next episode. Bye.